Welcome to the Post-Production Introduction course. This is a mini course designed for one thing, to help you know what shots you need on set as a director. Because in pre-production part 2, we're going to put together a shot list, which requires you to kind of imagine your film ahead of time. And it doesn't matter how many movies you've seen, if you've never cut footage together on a timeline, it's going to be hard to build a shot list. In fact, I'll never forget the day when I was sitting in film school and the dean of the school was asking us all what we wanted to be. And when he got to director, who here wants to direct? All these hands go up. I was surrounded by aspiring directors. And I realized right then and there, being totally green to filmmaking, totally green to Hollywood, I realized that no one was going to hire me to direct anything after film school. And I didn't have the money. I had to take school loans out to go to film school. So I decided to major in editing. It ended up being a double major in editing and sound design. And that helped me immensely. Here's why. It helped me know what I wanted on set as a director. After school, I was an editorial PA on a couple Bob Odenkirk films. And I was chatting with the DP one day, and he said something very interesting. He said he thinks all directors should go through editorial first so that they know what shots they want on set. I was like, whoa, interesting. Even though that was the path that I just kind of happened to fall into because I didn't have any money to direct a movie, this DP's saying that was actually a better path. And you know what? I think he's right. It doesn't mean you need to be an editing major before you're a director, but any editing you do is only going to help you. So that's what this course is about. I'm doing this lesson with OS X. I don't have a PC. I'm not a PC user, so you'll have to adapt some things, but Windows is going to be similar. But there's one thing that's the same, regardless of whether you're on Windows or a Mac. When you connect a hard drive to your computer and power it on, you can never unplug it from your computer or power it off without first stopping it in your operating system. If you don't do that, you risk corrupting the data on the drive. And then also, I highly recommend you get a battery backup, a UPS, and you can find a link to that in the community. But what that is, it plugs into your wall, and it has a battery backup. So if the power were to go out, your drive won't crash. Because if you were working and this was just plugged in the wall and you lost power at your home for any reason, you could lose your entire movie. Trust me, it's not worth it. So with those things said, these drives hook up in a very simple fashion. After you plug them into power, you want to plug them into your computer, and you're using a USB-C cable if you bought a drive that we recommended in the community. And it simply plugs into the back. Can go either way. There's no wrong way to plug that in. And then it plugs into a USB-C port on your computer. If your drive has more than one USB-C port, you can use either of them, it doesn't matter. And you can also daisy chain drives together if you wanted to. So, without further ado, let's jump into the lesson, get your drive set up, get Resolve installed so we can cut that footage together. With your hard drive plugged in, you're going to see an icon for it on your desktop, or you can go to Finder, and under Locations, you should see it here. If you just see locations like this and you don't see anything, just click the arrow and it will expand it. Assuming this is a brand new hard drive, here's what we need to do. I'm going to close Finder and go to Applications, Utilities, Disk Utility. If you don't have applications down here by your trash can, you can go back to Finder and click on Applications there. On the disk utility, over on the left, you're going to see internal and external. Internal are the drives on your computer, which typically there's just one if you're using a laptop. And then external is the external drive that we're working with. So we want to click on that external drive. And what we're going to do is we're going to erase it. Now again, this assumes that this is a new drive and it's okay for you to erase it. If this is an existing hard drive that you have data on, you don't want to do this. So with it selected, I'm going to go up here and click Erase, and I'm going to name it. You can name this whatever you want. For example, I personally add numbers to my drive names, like Film Data 1 or Film Data 2, because I have more than one external drive, and so that just helps me keep things organized when I'm viewing them, because often I'll have more than one drive hooked up to my computer at the same time. Do whatever you want there. I'm going to leave this at Mac OS Extended Journaled and click Erase. There we go. The drive is formatted, it's clean, it's ready to go. You can see the capacity on this drive is 2 terabytes. Yours will be a lot more. I'm just using a small drive for this lesson. Go ahead and close that. And now we need to download the lesson files from the community. If you scroll down to post-production on the left, and then go up towards the top, you're looking for a link that says the gold lesson files. Click on that when you find it. It's going to download the zip file. The file I'm using for this lesson is smaller. The file that you're going to download is going to be pretty big. Depending on your internet speed, it could take up to an hour to download these files. When it shows completed, we can jump out of the community, go to Finder, go to Downloads, and there you should see it. I'm going to copy this file to my external hard drive. On your keyboard, while you're clicked on this Finder window, hit Command-N. That's going to open up another Finder window. I'm going to click on Film Data and then just drag this over. Once it's there, double-click on it. Once the file unzips, you should see a folder like this called the Gold Lesson Files. Great. I'm going to go ahead and delete the zip file. Just drag it to the trash. And now I want to talk to you a little bit about media management. It will save you so much stress if you force yourself to be organized with your media. I'm going to show you the way I do this, and you can do it however you want, but just develop a system and then stick to that system as you make your first film, and then the second and the third, and ongoing. Here's what I do. On all of my external drives, I have a folder called Resolve Original Media. It's just the name I used. You can name it whatever you want, but I keep it the same on each of my drives that I'm using for filmmaking. So on this drive, I'm going to control-click, right-click, do New Folder, and I'm going to double-click on that. I'm going to add a new folder for this film that we're editing. I just call it the title of the movie. Then double-click on that. And inside of this, I create a series of folders that I do for every film project that I do. One of them is called RAW, which stands for the raw files that I'm getting off my camera each day. And I'll do other folders like music, etc. We're not going to go into that now. We'll cover that more in post-production, but I'm just giving you an idea of what I do. So I'm going to back up. Right now on your drive, make sure you have a folder that's going to contain all the files for your movies. And then within that, create a folder for this movie. And then in there, create a folder called RAW. Once you've done that, double-click on RAW. And then over here on our other Finder window, and if you happen to close that, again, just do Command-N to open a new one. I'm going to go back to Film Data. I'm going to go to the Gold Lesson Files, highlight them all with Command-A, and drag them over. Now you'll see, since this is the same drive, it moved the files. It didn't create a copy. And that's fine. That's what we want. So I'm going to change this to list view instead of icons. You can drag these around and organize them if you wanted to for how they look in Finder. That has nothing to do with Resolve or anything like that. It's just for your personal viewing, which I find helpful when I'm organizing stuff, especially when I have a lot of files and I keep video and audio separate, etc. Again, we'll cover more of that in post-production. I'm going to change it to list right now. So there's all my files in RAW, in a folder called the Gold, in a folder called Resolve Original Media. And then this folder should be empty now, which it is, so I'm just going to drag that to the trash. And you'll see my other Finder window disappeared here. It did that because it was open to that folder I just dragged to the trash. So once that folder is gone, it just closed it. You'll see that happen too, like if you have a Finder window open for an external drive and then you stop it, that window will disappear. In fact, while we're talking about that, this is how you stop a drive. So if I wanted to disconnect my drive for any reason, I would click this, and when it disappeared from here, then I can safely unplug my drive from the computer. And as I mentioned before, you never want to do that without ejecting or stopping the drive because you could corrupt the data on the hard drive. I've had that happen before. Sweet. So now we've got our hard drive formatted and ready to go. We've got the lesson files put on it. Now it is time to install DaVinci Resolve on your computer. Here's how we do it. Go to your browser and go to this address, blackmagicdesign.com/products/DaVinci Resolve. You'll probably see some movies auto-playing, but if you scroll down, you'll see something similar to this where you can download Resolve. Go ahead and click this top free download now. If you purchased a Pocket Cinema camera, you get DaVinci Resolve Studio 18 for free, so that's what you want to download. If you didn't do that, go ahead and download DaVinci Resolve 18 for your operating system. I'm going to do Resolve Studio for Mac. And it gives me the option to register it here. So I'm going to go ahead and take the time to do that. You will need the DaVinci Resolve Studio card that came with your Blackmagic camera. Just plug in your information and enter your serial here, and then click Register and Download. You can download Resolve Studio without registering if you've already done that, or if you just want to do that later. But I just go ahead and do that right off the bat, so it's one less thing for me to remember later on. Once the file downloads, you'll see it in your Downloads folder. If you see two files and one says .part on it, it's not downloaded yet. It's going to hit in around 3.45 gigs. Double click on that file. And once you have the .dmg file, double click on that. I'm going to close these other windows so it's not distracting. There we go. Click on Install Resolve. Continue, continue, agree, install. Installation was successful. This prompt is asking to remove that install file because we don't need it anymore, and you definitely want to do that. So click Move to Trash. If you accidentally clicked through that and didn't let it remove it, just go to Finder. And if you click on Finder and it doesn't open, it's because this window's open. So Command N, go to Downloads, and you'll see the file there. In fact, my zip file is still here, so I'm going to drag that to the trash as well. Close that. Now if we go to Applications, you should see DaVinci Resolve. I'm going to click Continue on this What's New screen, and you definitely want to do the quick setup. So what it just did is it checked my operating system version and also my graphics card to make sure that they are compatible with this version of Resolve. You want green check marks there, and if you purchased a system like we recommended, you should get those. So click Continue. On Set Up Your Project, click the last option, which is I'll choose my resolution later, and click Continue. Project Media Location. Where do you like to store your media? So we want to browse to our external hard drive and click Open. There we go. If for any reason your hard drive was unplugged when you were doing this, don't worry, just leave it at the default and click Continue. I'm going to leave this at DaVinci Resolve for my keyboard layout. Nice. Click Start. I registered, but it's still going to want my activation key the first time it opens. So I'm going to enter that here and click Start DaVinci Resolve. On this first open, it's going to ask some questions like this. Would like to access files on your removable volume, which is just another way of saying your external hard drive. Click OK. And there we have it. I'm so excited. You are going to have so much fun with this application. And if this looks scary or complicated, don't worry. I'm going to help you all the way. The first thing we need to do is we need to import the footage for this lesson, the footage for this story, this shoot that we're cutting together. If you look on the bottom of your screen, you should see some icons down here. Each of these represent a different area of DaVinci Resolve for specific purposes. These are called pages. That's all you need to know right now. We're going to go to the first icon, which is the media page. If you don't see icons there anywhere, just go up to Workspace at the top, go to Show Page, and make sure there are check marks by all of these options. And also make sure there's a check mark by Show Page Navigation. The media page is for what it sounds like, working with your media. This is where you're going to import things, do a little bit of organization, stuff like that. Now, if you remember, if we go to Finder and go to our film data and go to our external drive, whatever you named it, Resolve Original Media, again, whatever you named it, the gold raw. Here are our files. On a normal shoot, when I'm shooting multiple scenes, for example, this story just has one scene, so it's all scene one. But normally in RAW, I would create folders like scene 1, scene 2, scene 3, and scene 4, and put the footage for those scenes in those folders. So just a heads up, we'll be doing that later in post-production. In fact, let's just do it. New folder, scene 1, grab all that, put it in there. There we go. Hey, let's do it right from the start. Now back here in Resolve, we want to mimic that, and there's more than one way to do this, but right now, let's just right-click down here and choose New Bin and call it Scene 1. What is a bin? A bin is a container in Resolve, just like a folder to contain things. And typically I will mimic the same folder structure I do on Finder within Resolve, just to keep it the same. It makes more sense to me that way. So if I have 11 scenes for a short film in Finder, I'm going to create 11 scene bins. And also, historically, bins were used back in the days when they were actually cutting film in editorial and splicing strips of film together. And they would keep all these different strips of film for the movie in separate bins. So nonlinear editing systems like Resolve still call them bins. Okay, so let's double click on this bin, and then on your keyboard, hit Command-I. Click on your hard drive, Resolve Original Media, the gold, raw, scene 1. And we want to select all of these files. You can't do Command-A in here, so just click on the first one, hold your Shift key down, scroll to the bottom, and click on the last one. And that will highlight all of them. And then click Open. Now if you accidentally miss one, and you're not sure which one it is, the good news is Resolve remembers all of this stuff. So for example, let's just say I forgot those, okay? If I do Command-I, go back in here, Shift, click, highlight them all again, it's only going to re-import the ones that weren't already there. It doesn't overwrite anything. It's just a reference point. What Resolve is saying, okay, this clip goes to a file on the hard drive, okay? So don't worry about anything like that. You can always re-import things. Now, these are called clips, each take from our camera. And you'll notice I named these based on the takes. And I do that in Finder before I import them into Resolve. One of the first things I do each day is I get back from shooting, I copy the files over, I open each file up and look at the slate, and then I name it based on what take it is. And that way, when I import it into Resolve, it's named correctly, and they're named the same both in Resolve and on my computer. You could just copy or import a bunch of camera files with the cryptic names that the camera puts on them, and then rename them in Resolve. But then you're always wondering, wait, what does this one map back to? So I like to do it first. So let's go back. I'm going back to the icon. Each of these is called clips. And if you double click on one, it puts it here in the source viewer. And you can click and either just hit your space bar or use these controls here to stop and play. And you can also click and drag and rapidly see what's in the clip. And this is called scrubbing. Now before we do anything else, we need to save this project. So you can hit Command-S on your keyboard or go to File, Save Project. And let's name this. Now just so you see how this works, if you close DaVinci Resolve and reopen it, now that you have this project, you'll see it there. And you can double click on it. Now something else we need to do before we edit any footage. If I go into my scene and I double click on a file, I see I have these black bars top and bottom. Why is that? Well, one reason is because we haven't set up our project yet. We'll dive into these settings more in the post-production course, but for now, just go to File, Project Settings. On Master Settings, Timeline Resolution needs to be 2048 by 858 DCI Scope 239. Because this is anamorphic footage and it's 2K. Go ahead and save that. So we've saved our project, we've told it what resolution it is. Now let's go to the Edit page, which is this icon here, or Shift-4 on your keyboard. Now similar to the media page, we can see all of our clips, and we can use this to change it from list mode to thumbnails, and we can use this little guy here to change the size of those thumbnails. You can click and drag things around to resize. And if we click this up here, it'll hide all of our bins. Or if we hit this monitor here, it'll give us some more space down here. So what's the layout here? Well, obviously this is our media. This is our source viewer. And this is going to be our timeline viewer, whatever we put in a timeline. So what's a timeline? A timeline holds our movie. Whether it's Top Gun Maverick or your film, the entire movie can be viewed in clip form in what's called a timeline. So the first thing we're going to do right now is create a timeline. So I'm going to click Master, and outside of my Scene 1 folder, because I'm not going to create the timeline in my Scene folder, I'm going to do Command-N, and that creates a new timeline. And I'm going to name it the same thing as the movie. click Create. And you'll see the timeline appear, and that little icon right there signifies a timeline. You can have more than one timeline in a project. Again, we'll cover all this stuff later on. But now, if you double click on this, that's what you're going to see down here. If for any reason you don't have two windows here, it could be because something's activated, like Inspector. So if you see one of these highlighted, if you click it, you should get that back. So the obvious next step is to bring things into our timeline. However, there's one thing we haven't done. What is that? Well, we haven't read the script. Editors are storytellers, and they have to understand storytelling as well. If you write an amazing script, have an amazing production, and hire an editor that doesn't understand storytelling, you're going to hurt your film. They need to understand story just like you do. And even though the director is going to work with the editor, it still helps so much if the editor also understands story. So our next step as an editor is to jump into our scene folder, and we need to watch our takes. We need to see what footage we have to work with. And I can tell you, even if it's stuff you shot, this can be a discipline. It is a discipline. It's hard to watch everything, but if you don't really know what you have, you can't creatively put something together. You'll miss key moments. So I'm going to change my media view to list instead of thumbnail, and you'll see I have things labeled by their takes. So scene 1, take 1, that's the format I'm using. Scene 1, take 2. So obviously these two would be the same camera setup. So if I double click on that and scrub through, you can kind of see what this shot's about. And then I can watch it in real time to check out the actor's performance, see which performance I want. Because that's what you're doing. On any movie, yours or someone else's, the editor is watching performances and you're piecing parts of a performance together, sometimes from multiple takes. So when the audience watches the actor, they're like, whoa, they did great. And maybe they did, but often those performances are pieced together by a director and editor team to make it even better than it was. So the next camera setup over here would be scene 1A, take 1. So that's up here. So again, it's the same shot, but just punched in a little closer. You get it. So you're going to look through this stuff to see what you have. Now let's say you've done that and you've decided on what you want to put into the timeline first. How do you go about that? Well, there's many ways. We're going to just cover some very basic ways today. And I can't stress this enough. Don't nerd out on Resolve. Any time you spend right now trying to figure out things to do in Resolve is a waste of time. I'm serious. You need to be completely focused on thinking about the shots that I got for this film. Did I get the right shots? Could I have done it better? What would you have shot? And then how do you put these together in the most powerful way for this little story? So I'm going to go to scene 1, take 1, which starts out kind of like a wide and then moves into a cowboy shot. Now I could simply grab this little clip over here and drag it down to the timeline, and it's going to put the whole thing in the timeline when I let go. Now you saw it was kind of like this. What that's doing is if I let it go right there, it's going to create a new video 2 track and a new audio 2 track. So I don't want to do that. I'm going to keep the mouse button pressed down and drag it until they're together. And then I'm going to drag it all the way over here to the front of the timeline and let go. Okay, so that's one way to do that. But I'm going to Command Z and undo that. I'm never going to use the entire take typically. I'm going to be much more specific. So I'm going to go up here to my source viewer. I'm going to get it to the point where I want to start. That's when the guy's walking. And now on my keyboard, I'm going to hit I to create an endpoint. And you'll see now there's a little endpoint right there. And then I'm going to let it play. It's the space bar or these controls to play. And you can also use J, K, and L on your keyboard. L will start it, K will stop, and J goes back. Also, if you hit L to start and then hit L again, it goes faster. Same with J in reverse. Okay, so I'm going to back this up to where he stops. Great. And now I used I on the keyboard for an in point, and now I'm going to use O for an out point. So I've got my selection marked. How do I get it down to the timeline? Well, one easy way is to click and drag it over to the source viewer, and then when this little pop-up menu pops up, choose Insert. There we go. So now if I go down here and grab the playhead, that's what this red thing is, it's the playhead, and that navigates the timeline. I can also just click here on the top and it'll reposition the playhead. And if I hit the space bar, it's going to show me my timeline over here. Awesome. So the next thing I want to do, he's looking down, so I want to have the POV of the gold bars. So I'm going to go to gold POV, and by the way, let's change it back to thumbnails. It might be easier. All right, here's the gold POV. So I'm just going to grab, looks like I'm moving the camera around a bit. A little note to you, when you're shooting insert shots, always hold the camera longer than you think you need to. I promise, you're on set, you hold it, and you're like, okay, that was enough. You get in post-production, and you're like, oh no, the camera's moving too much. So do it more than you think, and you'll always be glad you did. But let's just go right here. I for in, play. See, that's moving too much. So here we go. I'm going to do a new I for a new in point. You see it adjusted when I did that. Okay, that's fine. O for out. I could also click and drag this right down here to the end of this, like that. Or I could click and drag it over here. Now, if I chose insert again, it's going to insert it where my playhead is. So see how my playhead down on my timeline is partway through the clip? So if I choose that, look, it put the gold bar in between. I didn't want that. So I'm going to Command Z and just click the end here. So I'm at the end of the timeline. Drag it over, insert. There we go. Now the timeline's a little long here, and I'm having to scroll back and forth to see it all. These little magnifying glasses will help with this. If I click the first one, it puts the whole timeline in my view, regardless of how long it is. And I don't really use the middle one, but the last one, it's kind of a preset zoom. The last one lets you define a certain zoom with this slider here. So if you just want to, manually zoom back and forth like that, and you can use these to do it by increments. But if you set a certain timeline length and then click this, it'll go back to it. So if I do that view and then click this, it's going to go back to what I set it to. And there are more efficient ways to do this that we'll cover in the post-production course. But for now, this is fine. So let me get this to where I want it. All right, so we've got the guy walking up. He sees the gold. And I could go back to this shot, but that's kind of boring because I want to see the emotions on this character's face. Like, what is he thinking right now? So hopefully the director got a close-up. So let's see, which one was this? A way to find that out, if you put the playhead on the clip and hit F on your keyboard, it'll bring it back up in the source viewer. Scene 1, take 1. Great. So I'm going to go to Scene 1, A, take 1. What is that? Nice. It's the same thing but closer. Perfect. So let's get it to where he walks up, he looks down. I'm going to use the arrows on the keyboard, or you could use J and L, whichever you prefer. And right before he moves that gun, I'm going to put an I for an in point. Yeah, see, we can see what the character's thinking better there. O for out. Okay, now I'm ready to insert it, but where's my playhead? I don't want to insert it there. So I'm going to go to the end. I could also do Shift O to get to the end. And now I'm going to drag it down like that. There we go. So we're starting to cut this little story together. You can see how this works. A couple things you'll want to know. First of all, this red arrow means you're in select mode. And when you're in select mode, you can just click and highlight something. So I clicked and dragged. And I can then click on it and move it around. So if I moved it over here and let it go, it's going to be in between this clip now. And if I click and move it back, now there's a gap there. So what would you do? Well, you could undo that if you didn't want that. Or you can click and select this clip and then mouse over it until it changes. It's not, so let me zoom in a little bit. I'm going to put the playhead here because when you zoom, it zooms based on where the playhead is. There we go. That's what we wanted. And I can drag it all the way back over here and rejoin those clips. I'm going to click out here so nothing's selected. See how I did that? Like this was kind of highlighted there. If I click anywhere, it deselects it. Now if I right click, I can delete through edit. And there we go. The clip is rejoined together. But if I did want to reorder something, let's say I wanted to move this take to the beginning and swap them, I can do that. So I could just make this timeline smaller. You can also select by just clicking on them. I'm going to drag this over here, drag this over here, and there we go. So I just reordered those clips. There are other ways to do this that are more efficient that we'll cover in post-production, but you get that. Now, if we wanted to remove something from the timeline, it's very easy. You can simply just highlight it and delete it. But let's go back to what we had before. Okay, I just Command Z to get back to where we were before. Let's say I have too much footage on this clip. Like he's gone and then he comes back up. I don't want that. I want to go to a different take when he gets right off screen. So, and this brings up another point. When you're in production and you're having an actor move, like let's say they're walking off screen or bending out of screen, if they're leaving the screen permanently, especially like walking off, let them walk all of the way off. Do clean exits, because that's what you're going to want in post-production. Like if this clip ended here and I stopped it right there, that's not usable. That will not cut together in a movie, because if you cut away like that, it's going to feel weird. You're typically going to want them to be almost all the way off the screen when you cut. And as we can see, that's about right here on this clip. See where my playhead is. So how would I do this? Well, I could hover over this until I get that icon and then drag it back. Okay, that works. Or I could just cut it. There's a nifty little tool called the blade tool up here. So if I click that, and then where my playhead is, if I click, it's going to put a cut. Then I will go back to my select tool, click on this, and look, there we go. So I can just delete this. When I hit the delete key, whatever is highlighted will be deleted. Awesome. Now let's look at another way to add footage in. Let's say you wanted a different part of the gold here. So I'm going to put my playhead over the clip and hit F to bring that back up so I don't have to find it again in here. And it remembers my previous in and out points. I want to clear those. If you hit Alt X, they go away. Same thing for the timeline. You can place an in and an out point on the timeline. See them? And you can drag them around. And if you want to clear those, Alt X. So back to my source viewer. So let's say I wanted this part right there. It's a little different camera placement. So I'm going to put an in point right there. And then what I would do is put my playhead over this, drag this over, and when this menu pops up, I would say replace. And it's going to keep the clip the same amount of time, but it's going to replace it with that new shot. Another thing you can do is overwrite. So let's say back on the gold that I did a longer in and out. Put my playhead here, drag it over, and I said overwrite. What's that going to do? Well, you'll see instead of intelligently replacing the clip, it just overwrote everything based on where my playhead started. So let me back up. When we did replace, I didn't have to have my playhead at the beginning of this cut. And by the way, I didn't say that, but these are called cuts in your timeline. Just like when they cut film back in the day, it's another throwback term. So when I replaced this clip, the playhead just needed to be anywhere on the clip. And DaVinci Resolve knew, hey, he wants to replace this. But when you do something like an overwrite, it's very literal. It starts where the playhead is. So I'm going to go to the very front of this clip, and then I'll do an overwrite. Oh, but wait, it blew away everything. Because again, it's going to go by my in and out points up here and just blow away all that. So I'm going to undo again. So let's say I want to put that longer take in here. What could I do? Well, one thing you could do is highlight this and delete it, and then go back up here to your source, drag it over, and say insert. And that's going to push everything in the timeline down. So there's different ways to do this, and there's, like I said, more sophisticated ways to do this that we'll cover in detail in post-production. So that's what I wanted to cover in this lesson. Nicely done. You've gone to the media page, and you created a scene bin, and you imported footage with Command I. And then we went to the edit page. We created a timeline and talked about how to add and remove content to that timeline. We also changed our project settings and we saved our project. Watch the next lesson where we talk about the trim tool. Don't try to cut this together yet. Watch the next lesson and then you'll be ready to piece this short little scene together. So I will see you in that next lesson very soon.